What was your biggest "we need to leave now" moment? This literally happened yesterday. So I was at work at a retail store and this guy with two massive buff guys came into the store to interrogate me about my cousin, who is on many drugs and probably owes them money, so they started to tell me to stop lying to them about me not knowing about my cousin. For more backstory, in 5 inches 2 female and I'm not muscular at all. So I went to find my manager for help, but she wasn't in the store because she was on her lunch break, so I had to hide in the work bathrooms out the back until my manager found me. It was quite terrifying, and I don't even talk to my cousin because he's a terrible human being. I was 15 at the time. I took about 10 of my little cousins with me to the park. 3 of my older cousins, but still younger than me or the same age, came with me to help. As I approached the park, there was a man and 2 other kids there. He came up to me and started talking to me. I tried to give him the hint that I didn't wanna talk, but he kept going. I asked him, "Oh, did you bring your kids with you?" He nodded and kept talking. Then asked me weird questions like, "Are you married? Are those your kids? How old are you?" I lied about my name and age and tried to walk away. Then he said, "I like you, wanna sit with me and talk?" I said I had something important to tell my family first and I'd join him after. I smiled and went up to one of my older cousins and said, "Pretend everything is okay, but we need to leave now." She nodded and I watched as the 2 kids left without the man. So we started walking home again and I made sure he didn't follow or watch where we went. I later found out that he had picked up one of my little cousins and put him down again, and one of my cousins saw, but she froze and didn't say anything to me. Luckily one of us saw him walk into a house and so we called the police. About 3 months ago there was a shootout at my office park. My next door neighbor was robbed and beaten, but his partner arrived during the robbery, waited for the robbers to exit, and then opened fire on their cars with an AK-47 in the parking lot. Turns out my neighbors weren't Amazon resellers, they were drug dealers. While the robbery was going down, I felt sick to my stomach and just knew I had to GTFO. I left, and was about to walk by their place when I had a bad feeling and went back inside to pee. While I was peeing, my heart was racing, and I didn't know why. I ended up dribbling all over my leg. I was practically hyperventilating. Then the shots rang out, 2 bursts. I hit the floor and hid in the bathroom. When I finally came out, there were people all over the parking lot and the air stunk of gun smoke, but everyone was okay. I ran all the way home, 2 miles. Watching the security tapes later, you see me walk in front of the shooter twice, as he sits in his car waiting to ambush the robbers. If I don't go back to pee, I'm right in the middle of it all. I also could have left as soon as I got the feeling, and would have been clear. But since I didn't get out fast enough, going back to pee probably saved me. I'm still shaken up, and I'm still having nightmares. Talking about it here helps. Trust your gut. Edit, here is an article about it with a video. At the bottom there's a video where you can see the shooting. I am not on this video, I am back inside at this time. I didn't know they caught the bastards until I just looked for the article, so that is a nice thing. But I'm crying from watching it. I'm still really scared and it's been several months now. Thank you all for the kind comments. It really means a lot to me. I feel ridiculous describing this as trauma when others have been through real trauma during wars, but it's very real to me and I hate it. I should add, one positive outcome, my brother-in-law has been checking in on me regularly since the incident. He just sends me a text to see how I'm doing. It's really touching. I already liked him a whole lot, but even more now. There's a few for me, but a significant one. I was 10 years old and my aunt had a small 100-acre farm that was also used as a livery yard for horses. I had a pony called Toffee. We often had kids come in our fields from the neighboring park. They would antagonize the livestock and horses, set dogs on the sheep, set fire to hay, and just generally cause stress and damage. We were told to stay away and ignore them and tell an adult if we saw them. The police often did nothing as the kids would escape onto the park, and the council refused for us to close off the public footpaths through the fields. It was a true misery. I went to catch my pony from the field and saw he was sweaty and wide-eyed. I don't think he understood for a moment that he was safe with me from this frightened look he gave me. I realized suddenly there were 6 people in the copse of our field. I was suddenly frightened and tried to encourage Toffee to come with me quickly. Initially the boys ran. I believe when they saw how small I was and that I was no threat, the group made way back towards me. The field was 5 acres and this all occurred in one of the corners. 3 of them dropped their trousers and flashed at me. Keep in mind, I was a 10-year-old little girl who did not understand but had an idea what was implied. In a panic I went to grab my pony, but he was scared of them and backed away. One of the boys shouted, "If you touch that horse I'm going to rape you." Toffee in that moment charged briefly toward them. I don't know if it was fight not flight kicking in or he sensed my terror, but it was enough to scatter the boys. I started to turn and bolt as fast as my legs could carry me toward the gate. One of the boys chased after me. I obviously screamed for my life and felt his hand briefly run over my hair before he fell over. I sprang the gate and ran down the drive to the barn where my aunt and mum were. I always wonder about if I had not run in that moment or Toffee not charged at them, if I'd be alive. The field was far away from safety. My parents would leave me for hours alone at the farm. There was a forest and stream as well, so my small body could easily have been hidden. If any are curious, I still have Toffee about 13 years later. He's 27 and a very old grumpy pony. I'll keep him till he departs the world. He has given so much joy for the little he gave, and he might have saved me had he not taken off when he did. Edit, pictures of Toffee. Answering some questions. This account was on my tablet. I hardly post or comment on Reddit, I just look. I did not expect to get any attention on this, but I do understand why people find it fake or suspicious. -100 acres is small for a farm. Do you really think a herd of cows, sheep, hens, horses etc. would not take up a lot of space? Think about how much is used for barns, stables, the old house etc. Consider how much is used to feed the human population. I think that farm barely sustained a few butchers in our area. Most English small farms are over 100 acres and go up to thousands. The kids were most likely chasing or throwing things at the horses. I don't know why they do this. Driving to Disney with Hubs and 2 little kids, 4 and 5. Stopped at a gas station in Tifton, Georgia at about 10 p.m. Wander in a little bleary-eyed with the 2 kids looking for the bathroom. Clark looks at me funny and points. While I'm in there I hear she's got 2 babies with her man. Just let them pee and go. I grab both kids and walk straight back to the car with only a small head nod to the clerk. Hubs was done pumping gas and about to go in himself. I yelled for everyone to get in the car. I would explain later. As soon as we pulled out I called 911. The operator told me they were already en route and to vacate the scene, took my info and wished us a fun trip. Walked into a gas station robbery with 2 little kids, peed and left with no issues. Bad gas wasn't that bad of a guy and let us go. I've told this story before. TL, doctor at the bottom. I used to really enjoy driving around at night, especially because around where I live there are a lot of country roads and they were fun to zip around. One evening, after I'd been at a friend's house, I decided to drive to my church, about half an hour away from home, and back just listening to music. The route is one I've done most Sundays for 17 years being driven, and driving it for about 4 years at that point, so even in the dark I felt fine to go 60 miles per hour, speed limit. I got maybe a quarter of the way there, and my stomach started really twisting. I knew that if I kept going I'd regret it. But I shook it off. It wasn't that late, and the weather was fine. I wasn't going to miss this driving opportunity. But as I got further the feeling in my stomach got so much worse and I realized I had to turn around. Just before I reached the hill pass that's about halfway to the church I pulled a U-turn and went home, and stopped feeling so anxious and forgot about it. Next day, woke up and got in my car to go to church, to find my usual route had been closed. Turned out that on the hill pass, the road had crumbled away, leaving a sheer drop that would have been around a blind bend for me. The road issue had been called in by a driver going the opposite direction to me about 5 minutes after I'd pulled a U-turn and driven away. I definitely have been, at the very least, badly hurt had I kept going. TL, doctor, racing around country roads at night would have got me killed had my stomach not warned me. In China, on a school trip, wandering around night market stalls of fried bugs and bull testicles, in a group of 10 or so high school-age kids. A 50-60-ish YO Chinese man engages us in conversation, claiming to be the curator of a local art gallery. Do we want to check out some paintings? Sure, we were bored and had lost our appetite pretty quickly anyhow. Well, we get to the gallery, which was a semi-rundown 5x5m building. The Chinese man talks to us from the doorway, inviting us in to see the paintings which are downstairs. The building is in the middle of a large paved courtyard, right next to a popular tourist destination. It's safe, right? Peering through the doorway, no artwork or obvious function to the building is visible. An entrance lamp is broken with its glass scattered over the doorway, and inside shoddy steps lead to a dank unlit basement. One of us interrupts Chinese man's sweet talking, "Come down, see painting," to grill him on the broken glass. Don't worry, many paintings. Beautiful, no, tell me why there's broken glass. At this point we're all exchanging glances, when I get the urge to break our collective stupor by yelling "Cheese it!" As a group we turn tail into a sprint, covering 100 yards or so before we slow down to laugh and crack jokes about kidnapping and organ black markets. Glad it was the best memory from my trip and not the last one. Was in Mexico City with family including 2 daughters. Grabbed a cab on the street around 10 p.m. to take us back to the hotel. I was somewhat familiar with the area since we had been there 4 or 5 days already. Cabbie totally passes the hotel district and starts heading away from the part of town we were in. Streets were getting more and more residential. I demanded that he pull over and we GTFO and walked back to the hotel, probably 3 or 4 miles. He was probably just padding the fare, but I was not going to take a chance on being kidnapped, so we flew. We were sitting on the sand at the beach, talking and having drinks. I looked up at the sky behind my friends and saw this huge, dark, ominous cloud mass moving towards us. I got up and said, "Guys, we have to leave now. Huge thunderstorm coming right at us. We have about 5 minutes." We managed to reach the car but had to sit in it for a good hour while the wind and rain ravaged everything around us. Trees were left bare, benches were upturned, trash cans were dragged for half a mile. The beach club tents were blown away and some people were seriously injured when stuff fell on them. It was all over the news that evening. My friends still talk about how I saved them that day. Most people didn't move from where they were sitting, even though we tried to warn them. I was at a stag do, bachelor party, in Warsaw a year or so ago. As often happens at stag do's, we ended up at a strip club. I was sitting with another guy who I'd only ever had jokey non-serious conversations with. We'd known each other years but we're both jokers, so we're always joking whenever we spoke. Anyway, he'd always had a history of being with a different girl every week, but he'd recently got serious with a girl and they'd just got engaged. I was really curious about what made her so special and changed his view on girls. He said that it wasn't that he'd never wanted a proper relationship before, it was that this was the first girl he really liked that actually liked him back. It was really humbling to hear that although he came across as being a god with women, he had actually struggled to find what he really wanted. He then asked me about my girlfriend and if she was the one I was gonna spend the rest of my life with. I was perhaps caught up in the moment but started going into a spiel along the lines of, "She's amazing, she's beautiful, she's unbelievable, I think I wanna marry her." Just as I'm saying this, another of our friends comes over and hears me saying this, totally getting the wrong idea. He points to the stage and says, "Are you talking about the stripper?" Me and the other guy just erupt into laughter. It was the first time we'd ever had a serious heart-to-heart conversation, yet somehow it had descended into a hilarious joke. We were in absolute stitches, that kind where you're laughing and the other person laughing makes you laugh more. The bit that was most ridiculous though was what the poor stripper thought. From her point of view, she's seen someone in the audience point at her, say something to two guys, and then the three of them erupt into laughter. She thought we were making fun of her. Anyway, first we knew of it was when the best man comes over and says, "I don't know what the hell you've said to that stripper, but we've got to go. She's sending the bouncers over." We thought he was joking, but he made us go. We figured out later what had happened. TLDR, had to leave a strip club because I was talking about how much I loved my girlfriend too much. I live in New Orleans, Louisiana, and years ago my brother wanted to adopt a dog from a small rural town about 2-ish hours away from NOLA. It was an easy enough drive, but as we got close to the town, Clinton, Louisiana, I started noticing a ton of police driving around. No sirens, nobody speeding by, but I think I probably saw 15 to 20 patrol cars in the span of about 10 minutes. We get to the house, meet the foster mom and the dog, who is the sweetest thing in the world, decide to adopt her and head home about 2 hours later. Everything seems fine, till the dog, climbs up into the front seat while I'm driving and falls asleep, leaving my brother to sit in the back by himself, which was hilarious. We keep driving and notice that there are even more cops driving around, but still no sirens. They're just everywhere though. As we're leaving Clinton, maybe about 3 miles to the exit or so, I notice this old white sedan come flying up on our rear, flashing their lights, honking, etc. I didn't really think about it, but I figured maybe these people were hurt and needed help or something. It definitely wasn't a cop car, but it was unusual for sure. I started to pull over to the shoulder and they pulled over as well, about 10 to 15 yards behind us where they stopped. I stopped the car, and when I turned around I looked at my brother. For some reason, as soon as our eyes met, the hair on the back of my neck stood up and I realized that there was something very wrong about this. I still hesitated, wanting to see if somebody needed help, but as soon as the door of the car behind us opened, a voice inside my head said, "Get the fuck out of there right this second." I peeled out and sped for the exit, making sure nobody had followed us. We got back to New Orleans safe and sound, but the entire time, I was watching for that car to ensure they didn't follow. I never learned what happened with all of the police cars or the white sedan, but something was really wrong. I should have listened to my gut way sooner. Stopping even temporarily was really dumb of me. I hypothesized that there was a drug raid or something, and the cops were looking for somebody while we were driving through. The white sedan was trying to get us to pull over so they could carjack us and dodge the cops further. I don't know though, and I hope that it wasn't innocent and somebody needed help and I bailed. But I don't think so. I think something fucky was going on. A couple of friends and I were outside a house party talking. I noticed out of the corner of my eye something dart behind some bushes towards the end of the block, maybe 4 houses down. It was dark out so it was hard to tell. We stood there a bit long and I swore I saw something again move to a tree a little closer. This wasn't the best neighborhood, heck my whole hometown isn't the safest, and I knew a couple people at the party were involved in some stuff, so I don't know if that entered my mind or what, but I got immediate goosebumps. I said, "Let's go now." A couple of my friends looked at me weird, but later one told me they knew by the look on my face something was up. I apparently look possessed. I had my keys so we ran to my car and got in. I didn't even let anyone get their seatbelts on, I just hit the gas. Based on the news stories, less than probably 5 minutes later a group of people shot up the house we were at, the others standing outside were severely injured or killed. Turns out a couple guys at the party were thought to have killed someone's family member and it was a revenge thing. This was over 20 years ago and I still get nervous if I'm standing around outside, especially if it's dark. I was 15 and had just moved to a new town right in the middle of the school year. I met some kids that seemed cool and took them up on an offer to hang out and spend the night at one of their houses. The evening started off great. The host's mom made pizza for everyone, they had a pool table and a PlayStation. I was having a lot of fun, when they all decided to head up to Mike's and try to buy some weed. I had not been around drugs at all but was feeling rebellious and nervously went along. It turned out that Mike lived in a questionably habitable house trailer about 15 miles out of town in the woods, with somewhat of an entourage of seedy figures. He was a formidable character, lanky, wild-eyed and rail-thin with a nervous way about him that instantly put me on edge. I am big guy and he instantly started sizing me up, grabbing my shoulders several times and squeezing my arms. He said I looked like a fighter and asked me if I wanted to fight him. I declined, but he kept telling everyone I was going to fight him. I'm sure I was visibly nervous, but my new friends just laughed it off and asked if they could buy some weed. He insisted that we have a drink first. I had also never drank, but I did my best to choke down the warm beer that was shoved unceremoniously into my hand. I took in my surroundings as we drank. There were tinfoil and glass pipes on every flat surface, at least 3 guns, and the rest of the adults looked like they were well ahead of us in the consumption department. My friend insisted on getting the weed, but Mike kept telling him not to be in a hurry. He brought out a bong, lit it and started passing it around. This was the first time I smoked weed. He harangued me over how I wasn't inhaling enough, and then laughed like a hyena when I had a coughing fit. He kept making comments on how I was big and acted tough but I was really just a big wuss, and other choice words that don't need repeating. He also made comments akin to taking me in the back room and making a man out of me. One of the tooth-impaired women began some long monologue about a man's G-spot being located rectally. I wanted to leave immediately. I took the first opportunity to tell my friend that I thought it best that we leave, and now. He finally convinced Mike to retrieve the weed for purchase and an exchange was made. I tried to walk out but Mike slammed the door when I opened it. He started insisting that I was an narc, and that I needed to strip naked so he could check me for a wire. This went for a few minutes as I just stood there uncomfortably, hoping he would end his little joke and let us go. Finally he said he'd know I wasn't a narc because I was going to smoke meth to prove it. I looked at my friend and just shook my head, but he was either too stoned, too apathetic, or just thought Mike was being funny. Either way there was no help there. Mike disappeared to a back room while 3 men that had been sitting on a couch got up and pushed the couch in front of the door, laughing and telling us to sit down and get comfortable. I had a hallway behind me and walked down it, looking for a way out. There was a small laundry room at the end and to my relief a door. It was only to my relief until I seen that not only did it not have a handle, it was nailed shut. Mike began yelling for me to come back to the living room. My brain was in a tailspin. Fight or flight. Fight or flight. Do something. Move. I kicked the door. It opened. There were no stairs, so I jumped down to the snowy ground and began to run. I ran into the woods, grateful that I had not removed my coat in the warm house. I heard a commotion behind me as Mike screamed obscenities at me. I kept moving. Then I heard several gunshots. My heart was beating out of my chest. I had a general idea of where the road was and headed in that direction, avoiding the meandering lane that led to Mike's trailer. I slipped on the hillside several times, but luckily there was enough moonlight to navigate through the trees. I heard a loud truck start up and then more yelling. I was leaving a trail but couldn't avoid it. Eventually I reached the frozen dirt road and started walking back towards the highway, staying in the trees. I seen headlights coming and hid, hoping it was my friend. It wasn't. Neither was the next one. I continued walking. It is worth noting that this is years before I had a cell phone. After about 4 miles the road met the highway back to town. It was harder to avoid walking on the road at this point. It was clear for quite a ways on either side, but when a car came driving by I ducked down in the snow on the shoulder, trying to get my head just high enough to see, hoping it was a police cruiser. I did this several times, my jeans soaked, me shivering with cold and fear. It was about the fourth time or so that I did this that I noticed the car was driving much slower than the 65 miles per hour speed limit. Was this Mike, coming to kill the suspected narc? I stayed low and prepared to run. As it got closer I recognized my friend's minivan. I stood up and waved and hoped for the best. My friends told me that the scene inside the house had turned to absolute chaos after I kicked the door open. Mike had gone ballistic, screaming that I was a narc and that he was going to kill me. He had picked up a gun and pointed it at my friends, telling them he was going to kill them for bringing a narc to his house. They insisted I was not and that he had just scared me. He then stomped down the hallway and fired the gun several times out of the door I had kicked open. My friends took advantage of this moment to pull the couch out of the way and run out the front door, jumping in the minivan and tearing off down the lane. After turning onto the road, they seen headlights behind them and intentionally killed their lights and turned down someone else's lane. They waited a while and then went out looking for me, driving up and down the dirt road and highway, absolutely freaking out and not knowing what to do. They apologized profusely and insisted that nothing like that had ever happened before. We were all pretty relieved to be back together. Not long after this, Mike and several others were arrested in a drug sting. I was worried that he thought I had something to do with this and hoped he wouldn't be holding a grudge and want to come looking for me, a lingering fear that eventually subsided, until one day a couple years later. I was working at the local grocery store and here came Mike, looking a little worse for wear. He looked right at me and my heart about stopped. "You're a big kid," he said. "You play football?" Me and a good friend of mine were drinking at the bar, about 8 beers in or so, and we started talked about women folk. He started complaining about he's doubting about his, at the time, 2-year relationship with his girlfriend. What we didn't know was that his girlfriend had just entered the bar and heard a great deal of it. She quietly announces her presence and they were both sort of staring at each other. You could almost hear their telepathic conversation, "How long did you long enough shit?" Then they simultaneously started staring at me and I just said something along the lines of, "Well, this has been fun but I have to go because, bye." They had a big fight, but they're still together, and now we're facing the door when we're getting shit-faced. Lesson learned. Once, while I was in high school, word got around about a party to be had at an old abandoned barn in the middle of nowhere. With little else to do, my best friend and I drove out there to see what was what. We got there, and the place is crawling with kids in various states of inebriation. Cars parked all over the place. We saw this was a bad scene, and noped out of there. On the way back to the city, we passed a bunch of cop cars hauling ass in the other direction. We missed getting swept up in the raid by about 3 minutes. Was a minor scandal next Monday, as several student athletes were caught, and lost their eligibility. I was in a school play when I was about 12-13. This was one of the rare opportunities I got to be in the school after it had closed, so I took the chance to have a walk around the empty rooms while the other kids and teachers were all in the main hall. It was about 7 p.m. At the back of the school was a bunch of temporary classrooms all in darkness, so I wandered in. The temp classrooms had a storeroom that joined the classrooms together. It was only small with nothing but the usual classroom equipment in. From out of this storeroom came my English teacher. Now, the class and storeroom are in darkness. I know I shouldn't be there and I'm pretty sure he shouldn't either. Strangely, he doesn't act at all surprised and in fact beckons me over and tells me he has something he wants to show me in the storeroom. It all just felt wrong. As soon as he disappeared back into the storeroom, I ran as fast as my legs could go. Me and my friends, after working the close shift at Mackie D's, used to drive over and go wandering around the grounds of an old hospital that used to house mentally ill patients a long time ago. It was called Whittingham. So this place was massive, and in the 60s had gone through loads of controversy of ill-treating patients, medical testing, basically all the bad shit, and between our friendship group these had turned into rumors and stories of haunted buildings and the like. They had built a new hospital next door, but the ground to this place were huge, abandoned and barely even guarded. This was around 1999 to 2001. Anyway, we used to drive over, park up and climb the fence. Each time we would try and discover a new building or area. Quite often the floors would give way, or we would have to jump across big holes in the buildings. It was pretty dangerous. But there were wards, huge halls, massive old Victorian buildings with towers, an old church, just an amazing place to explore and scare the shit out of each other. Think creepiest place you can imagine and you're probably on the right track. Like literally something out of a horror movie set. I remember one time, we were walking across an old theater room and a friend actually fell through the floor to the basement, hurt himself pretty badly, but trying to get him out / find him was the worst. I have a million funny stories about this place, but there are two terrifying times that will stick in my mind forever. We were exploring one of the bigger, older Victorian-style buildings and I had lost rock, paper, scissors to climb through the window and try and open the door from the inside. I will never forget that as I was shitting myself. I got the door open and we all went in. It was a huge mansion-like building with those stairs that are split at the bottom and curve round to join together at the top. Torches on and in pretty much pitch blackness we went up them and right along this corridor. Turns out this was a building of small wards. We walked into one and it was like a loop back round to the main corridor again. So we wandered down it and all the beds were just metal frames with nothing else. As we turned the corner there was one bed, however, that had a mattress on it and it was just stained with blood. Like a big patch. Was gross. We were messing about shitting each other up as we got back to the main corridor. One of my mates freaked out. He was pointing at the steps and there were drops of blood leading from the ward we had just been in back downstairs. I would say that's the most scared I've ever been, and when you're already a bit panicky and you see this, we absolutely bolted. I don't think we went back for a while after that one. The other time I won't ever forget is when we couldn't get into this one building, so we found a basement door around the back. You know those creepy thin stone steps that lead underground with a wooden door at the bottom. We pushed our way in and were in some kind of underground corridor. It had all of the pipes on the ceiling running the length of it. I'm a big lad, and I was stooping a bit to get through this, so you can imagine how it felt, tight, low ceiling and pitch black. We dared each other to go first and luckily I was right in the middle this time. Safest place. Anyway, this corridor went on forever. We were obviously in the underground network of utility tunnels that joined the buildings. There were a couple of staircases leading off every now and then, but most were blocked off, so we just kept going. After a good few minutes of walking we came to the end where there was one metal door. It was one of those classic hospital/jail doors you see in films with the little window hatch at eye level. We pushed this open, quite literally scared as babies, and inside the room was empty except for one thing. There was a single metal chair in the middle of the room fastened down to the floor, and above it hanging down from the ceiling were two metal chains with those wrist wrap/tie things on the end. It may be the single worst thing I've ever seen. We all knew what it was and what had probably happened there. But to see it firsthand, in this hidden underground room at the end of this shitty corridor. It will never leave me, that image. The stories of abuse at this hospital are widely known, but this was too much. Here's some photos so you can see this place for yourself. I've staffed a summer camp for 5 years now. A long-standing tradition is that some of the senior staffers regularly sneak out during the night and drive into town to hang out and generally be hooligans. Me and 4 other guys pushed a car around the bend from the parking lot, to avoid waking up the adults, then hopped inside and headed towards the town. After a couple hours of jokes, Baja Blasts from Taco Bell, and teaching one of our goons how to drive in an empty parking lot, we're driving down country roads joking around and listening to music. That is, until we turn down a random road and something immediately feels off. It's about 3:30 a.m. as we start down a hill, and suddenly the road goes from asphalt to gravel to dirt. We notice an old, rusted boat trailer on its side, a bunch of old tools, rotting piles of wood, and a general mess. When we reach the bottom of the hill, there's a big shed with a garage door that's wide open, and another shed seemingly made out of plywood with a door creaked open. There's a light shining through the crack of the door, faintly flickering, and a fuse box right outside the door. The mood of the car changed in an instant. For just a moment we all sat in silence, watching the light flicker. No one said anything, but we could all tell that something didn't feel right. Eventually, to ease the tension that we were all feeling, we start to joke, as teenage boys do, jeering at one of our friends to go turn off the light or open the door, when suddenly the door creaks open. The next few moments are a blur, but I can assure you that was the fastest an early 2000s Toyota Camry has ever booked it up a dirt road. All 5 of us stayed just about silent during the 15-minute drive back to camp. Something about the aura of the place felt off. To this day, when I imagine sitting in the front seat of that car, I get an uneasy feeling in my stomach. Was someone behind that door? Why were they there at 3:30 in the morning? Grand Forks, North Dakota, April 17, 1997. I had spent the morning in the shadow of a 12 wall of sandbags that I was helping to build up to a river level of 49. Around 2 p.m. I went back to my apartment to eat before heading into work, and I turned on the radio to try and catch the flood forecast. They announced that the river was currently at 48.6 inches and rising at a rate of half an inch per hour. For weeks the NWS kept repeating the crest would be 49 feet in early May. Now they had changed the forecast. They were now saying the crest would be 49.6 inches in the first week of May. I immediately began packing, and loaded up everything I would need for several weeks before going into work. I worked at a convenience store and I made sure to fill my gas tank before I began my shift. Before my shift was over, the evacuation announcements had begun, and we were swamped with lines of cars fueling up to leave the city. 36 hours later on Saturday morning, I was among the massive line of cars in the largest pre-Katrina flood evacuation in the US. I didn't get back to my apartment for months. The we need to leave now moment was the entire city. Got an Airbnb in Fort Worth at what seemed to be a spiritual retreat. We arrived to a padlocked gate with cameras, and the lady who opened the door had no shoes on. Looking around, there was furniture and overgrown shrubbery everywhere. The main house was dilapidated with rotting wood. We went inside and they asked me and my girlfriend to sign waivers. This was the first red flag. We then walked out of the house to where we would be sleeping. While we walked through the compound, we saw other people that seemed somewhat normal, also without shoes. Our bedroom was an old RV near the back of the property. This RV was collapsed at the front, and they tried to cover it up with a bedsheet. After trying to reason why this situation was okay, me and my girlfriend decided to look around to make sure it wasn't as sketchy as we were making it out to be. During our walk, we saw these long wooden boxes that had strange labels on them. I was getting very cult vibes from the people there as well. Some of them seemed entranced. Then, a little girl came up to us, also no shoes, and started talking to us. The conversation was friendly at first, but then took a turn. She said something along the lines of, "What if I cut someone up with a knife and put them in the oven?" At first, I thought she was being sarcastic or joking, but she kept following us and talking about cutting people up and cooking them, and then that's when I knew I needed to get us the fuck out of there. I told the lady that me and my girlfriend wanted to get dinner in town so she could open the gate for us and let us out without arousing suspicion. Later on I saw the main guy I met at the Airbnb on the Flat Earth Convention video by All Gas No Brakes on YouTube.